What would you do if you were lost, hopeless, and your only chance of survival depended on a simple bird? A busy road, honking cars, frustrated drivers, and in the middle of it all, a small, stubborn owl refusing to move. To most, it was just an animal behaving strangely. But to one observant police officer, that behavior hid something much bigger. What seemed like an ordinary day quickly turned into one of the most incredible rescues ever witnessed. And it all started with a little bird trying to tell the world that someone needed help. Highway 285, stretching through the remote interior of Colorado, cut through the dark landscape like a scar of asphalt across the desolate terrain. The cold wind whistled between the trees of the surrounding forest, and only the glow of passing headlights briefly illuminated the road before disappearing into the vastness of the night. Among the sounds of roaring engines and rustling leaves, a lone patrol car made its way along the highway. Inside, Officer Sarah Collins kept her eyes focused on the horizon. Her night patrols were usually uneventful, but something about the stillness of this particular night felt unsettling. Suddenly, the radio crackled, breaking the silence with the dispatcher's voice reporting an unusual situation. Several drivers had called in to report a small owl blocking traffic. Not only was the bird refusing to leave the road, but it was aggressively attacking any car that tried to move forward. Sarah frowned. Animals on the road were common, but a bird standing its ground against oncoming vehicles? That was something different. As she approached the reported location, she spotted a group of cars stopped along the highway. Headlights cast long shadows across the pavement, reflecting the concerned faces of drivers waiting by the roadside. As soon as Sarah's patrol car pulled over, all eyes turned toward her. In the middle of the road, standing firmly on the asphalt, was the owl. Its white feathers glowed under the harsh beam of the headlights, creating an eerie contrast against the darkness beyond. But it wasn't just the bird's presence that made the scene unsettling. The owl wasn't acting lost or scared, it was behaving with purpose. The small bird flapped its wings forcefully, releasing sharp cries into the cold night air as if trying to ward off anyone who dared come closer. Every time a driver attempted to move forward, the owl swooped toward their vehicle, forcing them to slam on the brakes. Sarah watched carefully. This wasn't panic, this was something else. The owl wasn't just blocking the road. It was trying to stop them from ignoring something. She took a slow step forward. The wind picked up, carrying the damp scent of pine and wet earth, thickening the air with an almost electric charge. Every detail of this moment felt heavy, as if something larger than just a lost animal was at play. The owl didn't move. Its golden eyes locked onto hers, unblinking and unwavering. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. There was no fear in the bird's expression, only determination. She was just a few feet away when she lifted her flashlight for a better look. And at that exact moment, in a sudden and unexpected movement, the owl took flight, only to land directly on her outstretched arm. The bird was light, yet its presence weighed heavily on her. A deep silence fell over the highway, making time feel suspended. The wind died down. The headlights of the cars seemed even brighter, their beams reflecting off the owl's outstretched wings. Then Sarah noticed something. Hanging from the bird's talon was a small, metallic pendant dangling from a thin cord. She barely had time to process this before her gaze was drawn toward the dense forest lining the road. The darkness between the trees seemed even deeper now, as if it were hiding a secret, waiting to be uncovered. The wind picked up again, colder, insistent, as if trying to push her away. But something inside Sarah told her this owl wasn't here by accident. The night crept forward slowly, and the once busy highway had fallen into silence. The rustling of trees swayed by the wind, and the distant hum of idling car engines were the only sounds filling the air. Sarah still held the small owl, feeling the rapid beating of its heart beneath its soft feathers. The metallic glint of the pendant tied to the bird's leg still held her attention. It wasn't just an ornament. There was something more to it. One of the drivers stepped closer and suggested calling someone who knew about birds. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then picked up her radio and requested the presence of a wildlife specialist. Minutes later, the sound of an approaching engine echoed down the road. A black Jeep pulled up near Sarah's patrol car, and a tall man with graying beard stepped out, adjusting his worn-out hat before walking toward her. Dr. Stephen Mitchell, a renowned biologist specializing in birds of prey. He studied the owl with a curious gaze before extending his hand, allowing the bird to sense his presence. The small creature, once restless, calmed slightly in his presence. Mitchell examined the tiny pendant attached to the owl's leg. The glow of Sarah's flashlight revealed something she hadn't noticed before, a small engraving on the metal. 2 words. Simple yet chilling. Help! Sarah and Mitchell exchanged looks. This wasn't a mere decorative trinket. Someone had placed it on the owl on purpose. Mitchell frowned and pulled a small notepad from his pocket. He recognized the item. It was a trail marker, commonly used by experienced hikers to mark strategic locations or as a form of personal identification. Sarah quickly accessed the missing persons database on her phone. Within seconds, her blood ran cold. Robert Hastings, 42 years old, experienced hiker, missing for 3 days. According to the police report, Robert had set out on a solo hike in Black Ridge Forest, just a few miles from here. He had last been seen entering the mountainous region alone, but never returned. Sarah swallowed hard, her stomach tightening. This couldn't be a coincidence. The owl wasn't here by accident. It was trying to lead them to him. Mitchell adjusted his hat, glancing at the small bird still perched on Sarah's arm. If he put that on her, it means he knew no one would find him in time. He paused, voice heavy with realization. She might be the only one who knows where he is. Sarah took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. She turned toward the impenetrable darkness of the forest beside the road. The towering trees stood like silent sentinels, observing without revealing their secrets. The owl let out a soft cry, flapping its wings slightly, as if impatient. Sarah knew exactly what that meant. They needed to follow her. Without waiting for backup, she and Mitchell grabbed their flashlights. With one last glance at the headlights illuminating the roadside, they took their first step into the dark woods. Behind them, the sounds of civilization faded. Ahead of them, only darkness, and the mystery of the night awaited. The darkness of the forest was nearly impenetrable. Only the beams of their flashlights cut through the void, revealing twisted tree trunks and wet leaves that glistened under the dim light. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and moss. Every step sounded louder than it should, as if the forest itself was listening. Sarah and Mitchell followed the small owl, watching as it flew in short bursts, perching on low branches and waiting for them before moving forward again. There was purpose in its movements, an urgency they could almost feel. The terrain was treacherous. Exposed roots created natural traps, and loose stones made every step a risk. Sarah nearly slipped while crossing a shallow stream, but caught herself just in time. The sound of running water mixed with the distant hoots of other owls and the occasional crack of wood, reminding them that they were deep in the wilderness, far from any help. The cold began to intensify. With each gust of wind, the tall branches creaked, whispering secrets to the night. Mitchell's flashlight caught something on the ground, and both of them stopped. Footprints. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been completely erased by the recent rain either. Someone had passed through here not long ago. A little farther ahead, near the base of a fallen tree, Sarah spotted discarded food wrappers and an empty water bottle. Robert had been here. But how long ago? Sarah's heart pounded. If he was still alive, he could be injured, weak, starving. Time was a silent enemy, stealing his chances with every passing minute. Suddenly, the owl let out a sharp cry, flapping its wings violently. Its behavior had changed. No longer a calm guide, it was now restless, agitated. It knew something. Sarah and Mitchell quickened their pace. The trail became more difficult, leading up a steep hill. The wind howled through the trees, carrying an increasing sense of unease. And then, the first sign that something was terribly wrong. The owl, which had been moving with purpose, suddenly began flying erratically, letting out high-pitched, frantic screeches into the night. It darted between the trees, looping back, as if trying to say something. Sarah glanced at Mitchell. Both of them felt it, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. There was something out there. The owl landed on a low branch, fidgeting, turning its head quickly from side to side. It let out another sound, but this time, it wasn't an alarm. It was a call. Sarah's stomach clenched. Robert was close, but the question echoing in her mind was far more terrifying. Were they still in time to save him? Will Sarah and Mitchell find Robert? Is he alive? Keep listening to this story to find out. But first, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this. The sharp wind howled through the trees, rustling dry leaves and kicking up dust into the air. Sarah's flashlight trembled in her hand, casting dancing shadows on the moss-covered rocks. The owl flew ahead, its path becoming more erratic, as if it knew that time was running out. And then it stopped. The small bird landed on a curved branch, its talons gripping the rough bark. It tilted its head downward and let out a deeper hoot, one unlike any before. There was no more doubt. The search ended here. Sarah and Mitchell aimed their flashlights at the ground below. Among the exposed roots and displaced stones, a narrow crevice opened at the base of a rocky hill. A hidden passage, almost invisible to the naked eye. Mitchell stepped forward first, steadying himself against the cold rock wall and peering inside. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and sweat. The space was tight, dark. But then a sound. Shallow breathing. Sarah held her breath as she stepped inside. Her beam of light cut through the blackness, illuminating a figure slumped against the cavern wall. Robert Hastings. He was pale, thin, his eyes sunken and reddened from exhaustion. His disheveled hair clung to his sweat-soaked forehead. His clothes were tattered, stained with dirt. His cracked lips moved slightly, murmuring something too faint to understand, his voice hoarse from thirst and fatigue. But his eyes, they weren't filled with immediate relief. A small, jagged stone trembled in his frail grip. The last weapon of a man who had spent too long alone. Robert didn't know who was there. He didn't know if they were predators, animals, or something worse. With the little strength he had left, he raised the stone slightly, trying to seem threatening. But his body failed him. Sarah instinctively raised her hands, showing she meant no harm. The owl let out a sharp cry and fluttered down from the branch, landing gently beside Robert. It turned its head, watching him closely. And then everything changed. Robert's eyes softened. The stone slipped from his fingers, landing harmlessly on the ground. A small, broken sob escaped his throat. The owl had kept its promise. Memories crashed into his mind like an avalanche. His lips trembled, and in a whisper he finally spoke. He told them everything. 3 days earlier, Robert had set out for what should have been a routine hike. The trail was familiar, the landscape unchanged. But then a fatal mistake. He strayed from the marked path, determined to take a shortcut. The terrain was unstable, the rocks treacherous. One loose stone beneath his foot, and suddenly, nothing but air. His body tumbled down a steep incline, scraping against jagged rocks, tearing his clothes, cutting into his skin, until he crashed against the base of a cliff. Pain exploded in his ribs. Something was broken. He tried to move, tried to climb back up. But every effort drained what little strength he had left. His supplies ran out too quickly. The forest, vast and indifferent, offered no mercy. But he wasn't alone. That's when he noticed the owl. At first, she was just a shadow perched on the branches above, watching him. A small, curious creature, tracking his every move. Then, as the hours stretched into days, she never left. While Robert rationed the last drops of water, while his vision blurred from exhaustion, she remained. And that's when the idea struck. With trembling fingers, he removed the small metal marker he carried, a simple trail tag, and tied it around the owl's leg. It was a desperate cry for help. Robert knew it was a gamble. The owl could fly away and never return. But she did. And now, standing before him, were the people she had led to save him. Mitchell knelt beside Robert, quickly assessing his condition. Weak, dehydrated, but still breathing. Sarah grabbed her radio, pressing the button, trying to call for help. Static. Nothing. Outside the cave, the wind howled, whispering the promise of an even colder night. They couldn't wait. Carefully, Sarah and Mitchell helped Robert to his feet. He groaned as his weight pressed down on his injured body, but he pushed forward. Step by step, they moved out of the cave. The owl flew ahead, guiding them one last time. And then, through the dense forest, the first traces of light. The trees began to thin. The radio crackled. Sarah pressed the button, her voice firm, urgent. They needed rescue. Now, a response came through. Help was on the way. As the relief washed over her, Sarah tilted her head up. The owl was still there, perched on the highest branch. The small bird that had faced the vastness of the forest, defied the odds, and refused to give up. In that moment, Sarah knew. Robert was alive because of her. The sirens pierced the silence of the forest. Red and blue lights flickered against the trees as paramedics rushed toward Robert Hastings. His body was weak, but his breathing had stabilized. His eyes, once dulled by exhaustion, now shimmered with relief. Sarah and Mitchell stood nearby, watching as the medics assessed his condition. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The looks on the paramedics' faces said everything. Robert shouldn't be alive. Yet there he was, reaching for the outstretched hand that helped him onto the stretcher. As the ambulance pulled away, Sarah remained still, watching the flashing lights fade into the darkness. The cold night air brushed against her skin, but she didn't feel it. Something deeper filled the space around her. She looked up. The owl was there, perched on a high branch, its white and gray feathers glowing under the moonlight. Its golden eyes, sharp and knowing, gazed down at the scene below. Sarah felt her throat tighten. The little bird had won. In the days that followed, Robert Hastings' incredible rescue, and the unlikely hero behind it, became the talk of the town. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "Newspaper, the bird that saved a man, the messenger owl of the forest. Newspaper, rescued by a miracle, how a small creature brought hope." The entire town was captivated by the story of the brave, intelligent owl. For some, it was simply a remarkable tale of nature at its most mysterious. But for others, it was something more. From his hospital bed, Robert couldn't stop telling his story. He insisted that without the owl, he would have given up. That the little creature not only carried his message to the world, but had also stayed with him, offering silent companionship and hope when everything seemed lost. And the town listened. The people began to see the local owls in a different light. Once overlooked, they were now observed with admiration and respect. Some residents left bowls of water and food at the edge of the forest. Others simply paused in the evenings to watch their silent flight against the twilight sky. The small owl was no longer just a bird. She had become a symbol. That evening, Sarah walked to the edge of the forest. The sky burned with hues of orange and pink, the trees whispering with the wind. Mitchell stood beside her, but neither spoke. They just watched. And then, as if she knew the moment had come, the owl took flight. Her wings spread wide against the golden light of sunset, her silhouette cutting through the sky. She soared high, then dipped gracefully, vanishing into the endless green of the trees. Sarah followed her with her eyes until there was nothing left to see. She knew she would never see the owl again. But that didn't matter. The small owl had fulfilled her mission. And now, she was free to return to the world where she had always belonged. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle deep in her memory. She had just witnessed something extraordinary, and she knew she would never forget. Sometimes the greatest heroes come from the most unexpected places. A small bird, fragile in human eyes, faced the impossible. It did not give up, nor did it hesitate in the face of danger. While cars raced past, while people ignored its presence, it persisted. Because it knew that someone needed help. That day, on that road, the owl proved something many have forgotten. Nature always finds a way to speak to those who are willing to listen. Robert Hastings survived because he trusted something greater than fear. Sarah and Mitchell found him because they chose to believe in the unexplainable. And the owl? She simply did what she knew was right. This story is not just about a rescue. It is about courage, about persistence, about the invisible connection that binds all living creatures. And maybe, the next time someone sees an owl watching silently from the top of a tree, they'll think twice before walking away. Because who knows? Maybe she's trying to say something. Did you like this story? Comment here what you think. And don't forget, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this.